los cielos cuando voy, oh Señor. Vamos por los cielos, oh Señor. En los cielos espera por mí, oh Señor. Cristo me salvó, Cristo me salvó. Vamos por los cielos, oh Señor. Y en la oración que me enseñó, vénganos tu reino, digo yo. Por los cielos cuando voy, oh Señor. Y en la oración que me enseñó, vénganos tu reino, digo yo. Por los cielos cuando voy, oh Señor.
First 2 weeks of January, I went to Colombia for 2 weeks. It was a trip organized by our church body's seminary, and the trip is called SPICE. It actually stands for something. It's an acronym, Spanish Immersion and Cultural Experience. So the idea was to spend 2 weeks in the country, a week of it studying the language, another week getting some connection with our congregation there, and then the culture as well. So that's the purpose of the trip. And so I'd like to begin our gathering today by giving you a little bit of a flavor of what a church service was like there. And so this is actually one of the songs that just played, and we're going to do it again. You can just follow along. There's a voice singing. I'm going to sing. And if you pick up music quickly, feel free to join in. You don't have to. But we're going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to read the words to you in case you're not, an Español hablante or anything like that. And so it says, En la presencia de la Santa Trinidad, in the presence of the Holy Trinity, El Padre, el Hijo, y el Espíritu Santo, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, nos reunimos en tu palabra, we gather together in your word. Señor, que tus siervos escuchan, speak, O Lord, for your servants are listening. And so that's they used it at the very beginning of the worship service to kind of set the tone for what they were there for that day. And so we'll go ahead.
En la presencia de la Santa Trinidad, el Padre, el Hijo y el Espíritu Santo, nos reunimos en tu palabra. Habla, oh Señor, que tus siervos escuchan. Habla, oh Señor, que tus siervos escuchan.
All right. So as we talk about it, a three-part outline. You go on a trip like this, and it's 2 weeks there, and so land on the plane in the city of Medellin, go through customs and immigration, get out of the airport, get picked up from the airport, and get dropped at about noon in a Spanish classroom where you're supposed to talk only in that language for the whole time you're there. It was a little bit overwhelming at first. And then to take that and spread it out over 2 weeks. So you think of how can you logically break out this 2-week experience into something that would be meaningful for all of you. And so we're going to follow this outline. We're going to talk about la cultura, that's the culture in Colombia, the culture in Medellin, the city where we spent time. We're going to talk about la iglesia, which is the church. In case you are one who pieces together, you may have heard of Julio or Enrique Iglesias, so their last name means churches. All right, so now you know something. You can't say you didn't learn anything today. And then the last one, number 3, oportunidades ahora y en el futuro. That's opportunities today and in the future, particularly about the church and about sharing the gospel with people all throughout Latin America. And so that's the outline that we'll follow. So we will start with the culture. So the city that I spent most of the time is the city called, I got to pronounce it, it's Medellin. And it's a city, it's actually the second biggest city in all of Colombia. The biggest city is Bogota, the capital. So Medellin is number 2. The city itself, 2.5 million people. If you count the surrounding area, the suburbs, so to speak, you're looking at more like 3.7 million people. So it is a large city. You can kind of see it in the pictures. The layout of the city, so they say the city sits in like a saucer. And so you know the saucer or bowl, maybe bowl is a better picture. The city sits in the valley, and then on every side of the city, the mountains go up on the side. And so it makes for this very scenic layout, because no matter which way you look, you're seeing mountains. And you're seeing city, just like in the picture, with mountains in the background. And so if you get a clear sunny day, it's beautiful. The city sits at about 6,000-ish, 6,500 feet in elevation. And so even though it's almost right on the equator, the climate there is just amazing. They call it the city of eternal spring. And so if you picture springtime climate every day. So every day that I was there, I think the warmest day it got into, so they counted in Celsius, so I'm not really good at converting that, but I would have guessed that it was the warmest day was mid to upper 70s. The coolest day was, because it rained, was probably the lower 70s. And so every day the high was in that range, the low was in the low 60s. And so it's just, and it's every day, that's what it is. Beautiful climate there. As a city, Medellin it's one of like the innovation and entrepreneurial and business leaders in South America. I'm not sure how that happens exactly, other than people who want to be entrepreneurs find themselves drawn to that place, and they want to grow their own businesses, and they want to do those kind of things there. And so in that way, in that mode of thinking, it's a very forward-thinking and progressive type city. Its history, Medellin, is not as old as a lot of the other cities in Latin America. I think its history only goes back 100, 150 years, somewhere around there. If you go to other cities in South America, their history goes back a couple hundred years to the time of the Spanish. So Medellin doesn't quite have that history. And the last thing that I'll talk about the city, you can see it in the picture on the left. You've probably seen one of those, but usually where do you see something like that? Yeah, ski resort, right? So that's public transportation in Medellin. And they built those because the city sits in the valley like that. Well, the way the wealthier people live on the bottom, the poorer people live up the hillsides. And so what it would do is it would take, if you were a poor family, it would take literally all day to go into town and to go shopping, and to march back up the hill and climb back up the hill with whatever you bought at the store. And so part of their progressivism is also seen in this public transportation. They made a way for their poor people to get into town, to buy the things that they needed, and get back up to their homes in a reasonable amount of time. And so that's one way of public transportation that the city's actually known for. They were the first city to use that as just public transportation. I think the first in the world to do that. That's not a ski resort. So I will probably end up talking more about that kind of stuff in a minute, but any question just on Medellin, because after this I'll talk more about Colombia in general. Yeah, Mark. Yes. Cities in South America, I would say if you go to Phoenix, there's neighborhoods you probably wouldn't want to go to at night, and probably neighborhoods you'd stay away from at night. Well, same thing there. Areas where you'd only go during the day, areas where you maybe wouldn't go at all. But in general, we took the buses. To get around town, we took buses, we took taxis, there's a rail line that runs right down the center of the city. We took that, and of course, I'm a giant in Colombia. On the flight, so the flight I took a flight from LAX to Panama City. On the flight from Panama City to Medellin, I get up to get off the plane. and everyone else on the plane is this tall. The tallest people are that tall. So I'm a giant. I don't know if that affects anything like that, but yeah, no, felt safe the whole time. One other thing that I didn't mention about Medellin, so with religion, it's different as well. You go to a lot of places all throughout Latin America, and you expect to see a heavy Roman Catholicism influence throughout. And yeah, there were churches. I took pictures of a lot of them. But everyone says that the influence of Roman Catholicism in Medellin is not as heavy as it is in a lot of other places in South America. That the people there are a little more, I guess, secular, a little more indifferent toward that kind of thing. And so it makes for, I guess, a not so typical South American population as what you would expect to encounter. So now I'm going to go on from Medellin. One more picture. So I talked about public transportation. This is another mode of that. Those are actually outdoor escalators. So there was a neighborhood that was hard to get to on the metro cable, so they actually put in these outdoor escalators. It's the orange thing that zigzags its way down to make it easier for people to go from their neighborhoods and interact and to do the shopping that they need to do and to connect with the rest of the city. So now I'm going to talk about so a little bit of history. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but you can really divide Colombian history into three eras. There was pre-Spain. Spanish arrived there, I think, in the 1600s. So pre-Spain, you're talking indigenous peoples and so on. The Spanish arrived, and that's just a random picture of a Spanish conquistador. I don't remember his name, just wanted to have one up there. Spanish arrived and colonized and, in a sense, took over. And the Spanish dominated that area for about 300 years, which is why, of course, all the people there speak Spanish. And then independence is the last one. They got their independence in the early 1900s, if my memory is correct. And the man on the bottom right is Simón Bolívar. He was one of the independence fighters throughout South America. And so you find statues of him and pictures of him all over Colombia because he was instrumental in their gaining their independence from Spain. So that's history, little background to it. Talking about people, so this photo on the right, you might notice an ugly guy on the left. So the guy in the middle, the other giant, is my friend Sam, who's a professor at our seminary. So Sam and I, Sam's about, so I'm 6'4", he's about 6'3", and we kind of have a similar build. And they just thought it was funny that there were these two gigantic Americans coming to stay at their house. But this was our host family. So the week that we were in Spanish school, we stayed with a host family. And so the person to my right, her name is Yolanda. She was the mother. The person to Sam's right, that is Manuela. She was Yolanda's daughter. She's probably about 23 or 24, somewhere in there. There was another daughter who wasn't home when we took the picture. And then the girl on the far left was, I think, their cousin, and just happened to be staying with them for the time that we were there. And so you can imagine a house full of people, mom, two daughters, and the cousin, and then two extra Americans taking their two guest rooms while they were there. And they were just happy to have us there, happy to have people interact with, and so on. You think about people from Colombia. A lot of this, I would say, I wouldn't say it's unique to Colombia, although some of it is. There are people that love to sing. And so one of the things that I was really happy with in their church service, it was like, I hear all these people singing. And I was just Joe in the seat that time because I didn't have to be up in front. And just you hear everyone in the church singing. They're a culture of singers. And I was talking with somebody after the service, and she said, yeah, we sing when we do the laundry, we sing when we do the dishes, we sing when we fold the laundry, we sing when we're walking down the street. They're just a culture of singers. And so kind of a neat thing. Also, they like to dance. Dancing and singing kind of go together. Usually in America, we think of dancing as, how do I want to put it? Something that happens in the dark. And something that you don't want people to see. Well, dancing for them, it doesn't have the connotations that it does in America. It's just dancing. It's having fun. It's how they have fun. Singing, dancing. Together with dancing is fiestas. We spent the second week in the home of the pastor, who I'll show you later. But he was just talking about, in January we have this fiesta, and then in February we have this fiesta, and then March, every month there's a different fiesta, which is like a national holiday or something. And it's basically an excuse to have a party. And so there's just always fiestas. Every 3-4 weeks, a different fiesta comes along. But the last thing that I'll talk about the Colombian people, and this was something that really struck me, is that I believe they are some of the friendliest people on earth. And my story of that actually goes back, so if you remember the picture of the metro cable, the gondola, so one day, so what we did when we were in Spanish class was in the morning we had classroom class, and then in the afternoon we went with one of our teachers on a tour around town. We're going to see this well-known site, we're going to see this site to help us to know the city. And so one of the days, we're going to ride in the metro cable. It gives you get to see some of the comunas, the neighborhoods that are up on the hillside. So we got in the metro cable, and being, I don't know, Americans, whatever, the natural thought is, oh, we'll ride in our own. Well, we got in one with 3 other Colombians who were in there, and then we sit down, and our teacher says, come on, guys, say hi to everybody. So we smile and say hi to them. We'll start to talk with this family. It was a husband, his wife, and then the husband's sister who was blind. And so we're talking to them. Well, what are you here for? Oh, we're here studying Spanish. And the blind sister in that metro cable she says, we're so happy that you're here. So happy to have people visiting our country. And actually, she said, so happy to have people visiting our country again. Because there was a time when nobody came to visit because it was so violent and so dangerous. And so she said, we hope you enjoy it. Our country is your country. We're just so glad to see you, so glad to have you here. Actually, she didn't say so glad to see you. She was blind. But so glad to have you here, so glad to get to know you, and so on. It was just a really neat interaction. And if I had been, I'm not a picture taker. If I'd been a picture taker, I would have thought, hey, let's snap a selfie or something. But didn't cross my mind when I was sitting in the cable with them. But yeah, they're just so friendly and so welcoming. And that was something that really stuck with me. It was just how friendly and welcoming they were. Looking at their economy, everyone knows Colombia for coffee. All right, so that's one of the things most known about Colombia. Coffee. Coffee is one of the... What's everyone laughing about? Oh, yes. Well, they are related, and I will talk about that. So coffee grows, I'll give you a little bit. So we went on a tour of a coffee farm, and so we got this whole history of coffee and how it came to be and how you make it and so on. So coffee originally, almost all coffee originates in Arabia. Almost all coffee is Arabic. And so I think this was trade routes at several hundred years ago. The people who brought coffee out of Arabia first were the Dutch. The Dutch people brought it to Holland. Well, coffee does not grow in the Netherlands. A little too cold. And so then, when the Europeans were colonizing and settling in Central and South America, they brought the coffee along, and they discovered coffee grows great in a lot of areas of Colombia and other areas in the tropics. You see, what coffee needs to grow, it needs 2 things. It needs a tropical climate, and it needs a certain elevation. And there are areas in Colombia that provide both of those. And so coffee is one of their big economy items. Now, the interesting thing is coffee in Colombia, Colombians, we might think, Colombians are always drinking good coffee, and that's not true at all. Actually, the best coffee in Colombia all gets exported. Exported to Europe, exported to the United States, so that we can enjoy it. And the reason Colombian coffee is known to be so good is because Colombia, as a nation and as an industry, they have a standard, a national standard for how their coffee is grown, for how the coffee is harvested, and for how it's treated after it's harvested, and so on. So that it's almost their way of guaranteeing if you buy coffee with Juan Valdez on it, you're getting good coffee. And so that's one of their big exports. I could talk about coffee for a whole hour, but I won't do that to you. So what you're seeing in this picture, it's tough to see, but on the middle of the picture you see a hillside. Those are coffee plants growing on that hillside. And so part of their method for growing it is, I will put this out here. Colombian coffee is all harvested bean by bean from the plant by an individual person. And so what there are people who travel through Colombia because it comes ripe at different times. So it's ripe in this region, and then it's ripe in the next region, and then it's ripe in the next region. And so there's people who are professional coffee harvesters, and they come through and they harvest the beans from the plant, and they put it in their bag, and then they carry it through to be processed. And so that's the way Colombia grows it. A lot of the other cheap coffee around the world is grown in Brazil. And Brazil just basically cuts off the stem where the pods are, where the beans are. And then they have a machine strip it, and they don't necessarily wait for it to be ripe. They just cut it off when it's ready. Or not when it's, they cut it off when they say it's ready. And so that's why your lower grade coffees tend to have more of a, not such a rich and a smooth flavor. They tend to be a little more bitter, a little more even burnt. It's because of the way it's harvested. And then there's roasting and all that. But the other trivia, see, I told you I wasn't going to talk about coffee forever. The other trivia is that whether it's espresso, whether it's coffee, no matter what kind of coffee it is, it's all the same bean. The difference is how you roast the bean and how you prepare the coffee. And so you can have a lighter roast, you can have a darker roast, and then you can prepare the coffee in a standard drip, you can prepare it in another, yeah. So anyways, no more coffee. It's one of their big exports. The average income in Medellin, it varies throughout Colombia. In Medellin, the city, the average income all across the city is $300 a month. So it kind of gives you an idea of the kind of income that they live with. Colombian pesos is their dollar, is their money. So the conversion rate is a little different. When I was there, it was like 3,150 Colombian pesos to $1. So you can do the math. 1 Colombian peso is worth about 3% of a penny, or about 0.3 of a penny, something like that. I'm not good at math. There's a reason I'm a pastor. Yeah, how much?
About 0.003.
Yeah, so there we go. There's a reason he's the treasurer and I'm not as well. So yeah, the conversion is different. So the pay is in Colombian pesos, but it's interesting with the peso being, so 3,000 pesos to $1. You don't buy something for just a peso. Everything is like a couple hundred pesos or a couple thousand pesos. And so they're 1,000 peso bills. I brought home bills for my kids, souvenirs, 2,000 Colombian pesos, each one of those. And that's worth about 65 cents. And there's one of the souvenirs I brought home for them. But that 2,000 Colombian pesos can buy you a bottle of water at a little corner store, little corner tienda. But if you go to the big store, it's like the Colombian Walmart, it's Éxito, which means success. You go to the Colombian Walmart, you can get a giant bottle of water for like 750 pesos, so about 30 cents, 25 cents, something like that. So the cost of things is less, but their income is also significantly less than what any American is used to. Most middle class and under in Colombia don't have bank accounts. They just get paid and they live with that money, and then when it's gone, they hope they get paid again. My Spanish teacher for the week, he said, we were talking about necessities and things like that, and obviously food, clothing, shelter are necessities, and then he pulls out his phone and he says, "What about this? Is this a necessity?" And he actually talked about, he said, there are people who will pay their cell phone before they will buy food. Because they see it as that much of a necessity. Might be a little, I won't comment on it. That's what he talked about. Let's see here. Talked about all of that, middle class, cost of living. So another connection here. One of the pastors who I'll show you later is, they call it tiempo completo, full-time pastor. You talk about how do you make it work, how do you do all of this. Well, that pastor gets paid in American dollars, it'd be about $400 a month, so he's a little bit above the average. But it's still, the wealthy people get paid significantly more than that, and the poor people get paid significantly less than that. And so trying to get something right in the middle that provides him a wage that he and his family can live on. The other jobs that are good there, agriculture, business, restaurant service, tourism, shops. The poorest people will sell, they call it chicle, little packs of gum. Chiclets is the brand in America. They'll call it chicle and they'll sell it in the street. The poorest people do that because it's the only job that they can get. A good job is if you're in service somewhere as a waiter or a bellhop at a hotel, and then as you get into business, the jobs are better. But the most jobs are the ones that are on the lower end of the spectrum, selling stuff in a little tienda, things like that. This is the one that I know you've all been waiting for. Food. So the best way to describe food is to show you a picture of it, right? So they made a joke, the Colombians make a joke that Colombian food is this. It's how many different ways can you prepare beans and rice? So actually, but the dish on the left, I don't know what it's called, but you can probably see what it is. It's a soup, and then there's chicken, potatoes, and rice. We bought that in a restaurant, and you notice there's a little bottle of Sprite at the top of the picture. That whole meal cost about $4. The plate, the soup, and the Sprite all together, and a tip too. The meal on the right, that's called a cazuela de frijoles, basically means a bowl of beans. It has a much better ring in Spanish, I think. Beans, and it's not just beans in there, because you look at it and you say, I don't really see any beans. What's on the top is, we would call them shoestring potatoes. Avocado on the left. The front of the bowl it's a kind of ground beef, but it's more finely ground than what we would call ground beef. There's chicharrón. So you've heard of chicharrón in the store. It's called pigskins. Well, the chicharrón there it's fresh, it's different, and it's thicker. It's almost like a super thick piece of bacon. It's super salty, it's kind of delicious, and it's also really bad for you. So that you balance the delicious and bad for you part, and then finally there's beans on the bottom of it as well. So that was a whole meal, the cazuela de frijoles. That meal on the right was at more of a touristy town, so it was a little bit more expensive. I want to say that was probably, with the drink, $7 or $8. And so, one more food. This, if you ever look up traveling to Medellin on the internet and what should I eat there, you will see pictures of this dish. This dish is called the bandeja paisa. Don't ask me what that means because I didn't look it up. But it's like the dish of food that Medellin is most known for. I did not actually eat one of those because you can look at it. It is a ton of food. And so basically, if you're going to eat one of those, you just plan on, this is my only meal of the day, and this is going to be everything that I eat all in one sitting. On the left, you see avocado. On the back, that is, I think we call it plantain. Plátano is what they call it. And then there is chicharrón right next to the white thing is an egg. In the middle, there's chicharrón there to the left of the egg. Two kinds of sausage. One of them is chorizo, which is different than Mexican chorizo. It just has a different flavor. The one closer to the egg that's a little darker, it's kind of a blood sausage. Now, I hear blood sausage, and I'm like, I don't want to eat that. But I tried it, and it was actually really, really tasty. And then to the right, of course, you can see the beans. Under the sausage is rice, and under the egg, too. So you can imagine eating that plate of food. And I think that's also ground beef between the avocado and the chicharrón as well. So it's a lot of food. So yeah, the bandeja paisa. I will say the beans and rice in Colombia are the best beans and rice there could ever be. I tried to look up, actually when we got home, the first thing I did is I'm going to look up recipes for Colombian beans and rice to find out what they put in it to give it the flavor, because you think beans and rice, oh, how plain, how bland, but it was just delicious. I could have eaten beans and rice. I did eat beans and rice every day when I was there. I don't remember. I looked up the recipes, but I don't remember. I know sometime I want to cook a bunch of beans. Maybe the next time we have a church potluck or something, I'll make Colombian beans. How does that sound? I'm looking at my wife. I know. So, and so now religion. You can't talk about religion in Latin America without noticing that there still is a lot of Catholicism there because of the influence of the Spanish colonials and so on. So these are pictures of churches. The one on the left is in a little place in Medellin called Pueblo Paisa. It's meant to be a typical looking Colombian village from the colonial times. The two pictures on the right, the middle one and the one on the right. So the one on the right is a cathedral, Catholic cathedral, the city of Manizales. If you look, the central spire near the very top, there's a little ring around it. So one of the attractions of that church is you can climb all the way up to the top of that spire. And so we did that, and the church, they realized, hey, we can make money on this. So they started doing tours and charging people to get in and climb the spire and so on. I forget what the tour cost, $4 or $5 in American money. So that church is in a city called Manizales, a city that's not, it's actually, as the city goes, a lower income than Medellin. That cathedral was built around 100 years ago is when it was started. And it's one of the things, I guess it's kind of a travesty. You find it all over South America. Poor people in the churches that are just like that one, lavish and ornate, and it's just hard to look at and to see the fancy church and know that people are living with next to nothing, what we would call next to nothing, rather. The picture in the middle is the inside of that cathedral. Beautiful, beautiful on the inside. They actually were having a mass when we were going on the tour, and so you hear the sounds coming up through the building, and beautiful sound. But yeah, huge place. A couple more church pictures on the next slide. These are insides of two different churches. The one on the left is just the wood. You can see the wood ceiling all the way through. Just looked really interesting and amazing. And the very front, you can kind of see there's stained glass windows. And it's a biblical image. The one on the right I wanted to see because it's a little more typical of what you find in Latin America. The one on the right, so this is not the main altar of the church. This is a side altar. But you notice maybe the question is in this altar, who is in the middle and who's not? Yeah, Maria, who's in the middle? Yeah, it's the Virgin Mary in the middle. And Jesus is nowhere to be seen on that one. It's the Virgin Mary, and then there's two monks, the right and left. You can see on the right, there's the main altar of the church. And again, who's in the middle? Maybe it's not the Virgin Mary, but it's a virgin. And Jesus is there, though. Do you see him? He's the Ricky Bobby Jesus, if you ever watched that movie. It's a Will Ferrell movie from 10 years ago. Yeah, it's the baby Jesus up on top. And so you can just see the emphasis in that Catholicism there. It's we would call it medieval, where it's just Mary, 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 Saint, Saint, Saint. And Jesus is there, but he's baby Jesus, and he's kind of off on the side somewhere. And so it gives you, I guess it's interesting, to say the least. So challenges for the culture. I have a picture of Venezuela up there. Anyone know what's going on in Venezuela the last year or two? Yeah, and so with all that, one of the things that has hit Venezuela is inflation. And so it's not unusual in Colombia to find Venezuelans on the streets, and they'll basically say, I'm from Venezuela. I came here to try and get away. Do you have any money? That's usually how it went. And and Venezuela also is very anti-American. At least they were. I don't know if they still are. But when Hugo Chavez was there, he was very anti-American. And so anyway, the challenge with Colombia is that a lot of Venezuelans are leaving and coming to Colombia. And it just puts a strain on the society to, whether it's care for the people or just welcome them. There's just not only so much that they can do to be able to help them. One of the places where we stopped, it's actually not uncommon that if somebody's from Venezuela, they'll just hand out Venezuelan money to you as you're walking by. And it'll be 50,000, I don't know what the Venezuelan unit of money is, but 50,000 pesos, 100,000, 10,000. And they say, actually, one of the Colombians we were with is that money is really only good to be used for toilet paper because it's not worth anything as far as buying food or shelter or anything like that. So Venezuela is a challenge right now. Another challenge, this is the one. What do you think is in all those bags? Yeah. It's the narcotráfico, the drug trafficking. So we talked about coffee. There's another plant that also grows well in the same climate as coffee. It's the cocoa plant. And you can maybe draw a connection between the cocoa plant and what you see in the pictures here. So the same climate that coffee thrives in is the same climate that cocoa plant thrives in, which is also the plant that's used to make the drug cocaine. And so drug trafficking is a big deal because a farmer can say, well, I can grow coffee on my land, or I can grow cocaine on my land, and if I grow coffee, I get paid this, and if I grow cocaine, I get paid that. And so that part is a struggle for them. It's just the drug trafficking through the growing it and then getting it out of the country. Most of the drugs grown in Colombia come to America. The challenge that is connected to this is they call them, it's really at the source of a lot of the violence. There's two factions. There's the guerrillas, and the paramilitares, the paramilitaries. They both really want control over the drugs, and so they fight each other. And they're not afraid to take innocent people down with them. And so a lot of the violence in Colombia from 20 years ago was these two groups fighting it out with each other. The guerrillas and the paramilitares, and just going at it, and basically over control of who has the drug trading routes, who has control of where to grow the drugs, and so on, because the drugs are big business. I think the term in Spanish would be it's complicado, it's complicated, because the government doesn't want the drugs. The drugs are technically illegal in Colombia, and yet at the same time, the income that they brings good things. People will say that the metro line in Medellin that was built down the middle of the city, people will say that it was basically built using drug money, because Pablo Escobar through drug trafficking, brought all kinds of money into Colombia and Medellin, and then through paying taxes, that money was used to build the metro line through the middle of town. And so people see, they see it's bad, they see it's harmful, and they don't like the violence that it brings. At the same time, it's like, well, they did make us able to do this. And so, yeah, complicated is probably the best word to describe it. The government, so, what was this? Early 2000s, there was a president, I think his last name was Uribe, U-R-I-B-E. He campaigned on, we're going to wipe out all the violence. And so basically we're going to take the government and we're going to fight up, we're going to destroy the guerrillas, we're going to destroy the paramilitaries, so that they stop fighting and so that we have peace with each other. Talk to some Colombians, they'll say that it's not exactly how it worked out, but that he did shoot a lot of bullets and fire a lot of weapons and kill a lot of people, but didn't necessarily wipe out either one of those two groups that are causing conflict, or that have caused conflict in the past and to a degree still do. FARC is one of them. So actually the day before I left, a car bomb went off in Bogota. That was not FARC. FARC they both want power. And then there was a peace accord that was voted on a couple of years ago in Colombia that they sat down and they negotiated out this peace agreements. One of the terms of the agreements was, we're going to tell all the facts to everybody, which means that the groups, the guerrilla groups like FARC they're going to tell the truth about what they did. But then also the government has to tell the truth about what they did too. And so that went before the people to a vote, and it narrowly was defeated. And I won't give you the political commentary on it, but yeah, and some of that stuff still goes on. It's to a lesser degree now than it was 20 years ago, mostly due to the passing of Pablo Escobar. Another challenge connected to those two is just poverty. So when you have government that's not stable, when you have fighting, when you have drug trafficking, it's just really hard for common people to earn a living. And so all of that also feeds corruption in the government, and it just makes it hard for people to get ahead. And so poverty is, I guess, an outflow of those other problems as well. I'll go back here one thing. If you want to look up an interesting story, look up on Google or YouTube, it's called Comuna 13, C-O-M-M-U-N-A 13. It's a neighborhood in Medellin where there was a big showdown between the government and some of those forces. That's all I'll say about it now, but if you want to find an interesting story, look that up. A little bit of the response to challenges, though. So in Medellin, all throughout the city, you find commissioned graffiti on the walls of buildings. And really, really well done paintings. And that was part of their way of as a community grieving, and as a community saying we're going to come together, and as a community we're going to work together for positive change. We're not going to be violent. We're going to be positive and step forward. And so you can see the commissioned graffiti. The other one is just the metro cables. They learned that the more people are connected with each other, the more that they will live at peace with one another. It's just kind of like, it's easy to be afraid of the stranger who looks different than you, or has more money than you, or has less money than you. But when you know that that person, no matter how different than you, is just another person, it's a lot easier to live at peace with them. All right, so that is the culture section. I will share a couple observations, what I learned. One of them is, so Flagstaff, we live in a tourist town, right? And how do Flagstaff people feel about tourists? I know how I feel about tourists a lot of the time, right? And so it's like, all right, so yeah, I don't like broken sleds. But can I work in my heart to be kinder to people who are visiting my community from other places? Yeah, I can find that room in my heart to do that. These people were welcoming to me. Another thing is just be happy with what we have. It's so easy in America to just always want the next thing. I need the iPhone, whatever it is, XI now, or I need this new thing or that new thing. And it's just, the lesson was be happy with what you have, because there's so many people in the world who live with far less. And the last thing that I learned is just, what can be done about drugs? And it's not really something that I learned, it's just a thought that's heavy on my heart. Because if the drugs weren't getting sent to America to be bought and used, they wouldn't be being produced in Colombia, which means the violence maybe wouldn't be there as strong. What can be done about that? There are some people who will talk about legalizing as a means of reducing the violence, and kind of after listening to some of the people in Colombia, maybe there's some merit to those thoughts. That's a political debate for another time, another place, another day, but it was just interesting to hear from them, what can we do about this? Well, as long as there's heavy money involved, there's going to be fighting. Well, as long as it's illegal, there's going to be heavy money involved at every step of the way. So maybe the way to get the money out of it is to make it legal. So moving on to the topic of the Iglesia, La Iglesia, the church there. Pictures of the church. That's the sign outside. I can't really get a good picture of the building, but so the sign on the left, I'll read it. It's the Iglesia Luterana Confesional. So Lutheran Church, the Confessional Lutheran Church de Colombia. Wells is our church body. Underneath it, Personería Jurídica Especial. It basically means special legal standing, that the church can own the building. Because in America, one of the things that we can often take for granted is that the government lets churches do stuff. A lot of other countries, that's not the case. Like in Mexico, the government actually owns all the church buildings. And so I don't know what it is in Colombia, but they have this special legal status to have that building. The picture on the right is the inside of it. That's right as the church service was about to start. You look in that picture, on the far left in the front, they have pews, old wooden pews. Don't ask me where they got them or where they came from, but they got these pews in Colombia. The rest of the seats, you can see them, plastic lawn chairs. Because what happened was, we need more seats, and what's the most economical form of seating to buy? Plastic lawn chairs. And so there's a saying in Colombia, it's actually, they might just be in Medellin, talking about when you have something big to do and you need to divide out the cost. The saying is called, hacer una vaca. In English, it comes through as like make a cow. But at the picture, so you have this big expense, and how are we going to divide it out? So like you go out to dinner, and there's 10 of you eating, and you get one tab. Well, you got to hacer la vaca. You got to divide out that tab between the 10 of you. And so how they decided to divide out the chair expense was, all right, so my family, there's 6 of us. All right, so Van Kampens brings 6 chairs. This family is 4, you guys bring 4 chairs. This family is 3, you bring 3 chairs. And so now their sanctuary has plenty of seats for everyone who shows up on Sunday morning, all on the lawn chairs, or the outdoor chairs. What was the service like? You can look around. So this picture was taken on January 13th. Look up in the far left corner. What do you see? Christmas tree. Christmas tree is still up. All the Christmas decorations are still up. Part of that reason is the bigger Christmas day for them isn't December 25th, it's January 6th. They call it the Day of the Three Kings. And so that's often when places in Latin America, they give gifts and things like that, is January 6th. And so then they're also just not in a hurry to get rid of Christmas like we are in America. So it wasn't parks, malls, still had all their Christmas decorations up until like almost the day that we left, they started to come down. But yeah, Christmas decorations are still up. The music, I gave you a little bit of a sample of it at the beginning. Now that's really important. So I'm not going to. Several years ago, I also went to Mexico City to our church and our mission there, and walked into that service in Mexico City. And so if you're familiar with, we call it in our church the old hymnal, the one that was printed in 1941. So if you're familiar with that, it was basically that hymnal and all the music in it translated into Spanish. So if you're familiar with Lutheran history, a lot of Lutherans are German. And so German music, German hymnal translated into Spanish. What's the song? All these things belong together. One of these things does not belong, or something like that. It just kind of was like this. Spanish culture, Spanish music is not German. And German music is not Spanish. Very, very different. And so our missionaries in the last 10 years, we need to have a hymnal and music that fits Latin American music, that fits their culture. And so, like the music we used at the very beginning and the music videos that we had, that's the kind of stuff that they've started to use. Now, the church in Medellin is interesting because it was founded in the 70s, and so all those people grew up with all the German hymns in the church, and so they still use some of the German hymns, but they started using the other stuff. And they use the German hymns because all the people know it, and they use the other stuff because all the people enjoy it more. And I think that sounds awful familiar, like what we do here. So anyways, the service, they had no bulletins. Everything was on the screen. So on the front, you can see them up on the wall. 2 projectors, 2 screens, all the service was there. The Bible readings, everyone just pulled out their phone. All right, 1 Kings 18, and they search it up on their Bible app, and they read it off the phone. It was just really, really interesting. All the stuff that we're used to doing, they didn't use, and the pastor actually had his sermon on a little tablet that he was holding, and so paper's expensive. And so you think about all the printing of paper that we do without thinking about it, because paper's not as expensive for us, but it is for them. And so they just don't use that much paper. What the building was, it was an old funeral home that they bought and turned into a church. The funeral home moved across the street. And so now, if you get in the taxi, we did this on Sunday morning, we were telling them where we needed to go, and the taxi says, "Oh, that's right next door to," and he said the name of the big funeral home. And so everyone knows where the church is by that funeral home because it's right next door to it. I think almost every funeral in Medellin must be done in that funeral home, because the taxistas all knew exactly where it was. It's actually only a few blocks from downtown Medellin, like a 5-minute walk to the central square of the city and all the shops and everything. It was just great location as far as that centrality goes and being easy to find. A challenge with it is I think their special legal status makes them to some degree tax exempt or something like that, or have a reduced tax on the building. Well, the government looks at that building, Central City, they see dollar signs, and so they want to charge them more tax on it. Well, that's hard for that group of church people to pay. And so they actually ended up just recently having to hire a lawyer to go back and forth with the city or whoever it is that wants to make them pay the tax on it to try and get that fixed somehow. I didn't really get more information than that on it, but it's a challenge that they have with owning the facility. Is just, all right, so somebody wants them to pay tax on it. History of our mission in Colombia starts in the year 1974. And the picture there is our missionaries came from the United States. They brought the Bible and they went to Colombia, 1974. The first 5 missionaries were these guys. You look at the good German names up here on the screen, by the way. Sprain, Zimdars, Retzberg, Schlomer, Gaglein. So interestingly, the guy on the left is Mark Gaglein. He was my first Spanish teacher in school. The one second from the left is Lorenzo Retzberg. Went to school with his kids. The one in the middle, I think, is Schlomer. He was his whole ministry in Latin America, Mexico, Colombia, all over the place. The one second from the right is Roger Sprain. He actually is his son is my mom's pastor now down in Phoenix. And then the one on the right is Zimdars, and now his son is pastor of a Spanish-speaking church also in Phoenix. A little bit of the connection game there for all of them. So 1974, these 5 missionaries were the ones who came with the Word of God to preach, teach, and so on. They were there, not necessarily those 5, but there's some left, some new ones came over the course of time, until the year 1999, when because of the violence, they said, all right, you guys need to go. So pulled all the missionaries out of Colombia in 1999. And so when they all left, the church had a big party because they're Colombian. And it was basically a big thank you. Thank you for bringing us God's Word. Thank you for sharing it with us. And now we've got to do it on our own. Missionaries are gone, and so from 1999 on, they call it pastores locales, national pastors, local pastors. So part of the job of missionaries when they're there is not just to preach and teach, but to teach people to take over for them at some point. And so that's what happened in Colombia. The pastor here is Pastor Tony. I'll talk more about him in a minute. But he was one of the people who was trained and who took over when the missionaries left. Now, Colombia is a neat story because oftentimes when our missionaries pull out of a place, it kind of deflates. And I'm not going to say there was no deflation at all in Colombia, but really, as far as church bodies go, this one just took ownership of the ministry, took ownership of the message, and said, we're going to keep preaching and teaching, and we're going to keep trying to reach the lost, and so on. And so their story is really neat that way. In 2004, we started allowing missionaries to go back, but they were never there on a full-time basis. And so you know how I said our church body likes dumb acronyms? Yeah, latte. That stands for something. You see all the periods there? Do you want to guess what it's? You never guess what it stands for. Latin American, LA. Traveling, T. Theological, T. Educators. It's like they had to work really hard to come up with that one. So what it was called, latte. So these 4 guys were part of that team. So basically the idea was, instead of having missionaries permanently in this city forever, what we'll do is we'll send 2 or 3 missionaries here for a month, and they're going to teach, and they're going to teach, and they're going to teach during that time, so that the locals can be educated and be able to take what they've learned and pass it on. It was, I think, a good innovation, but the challenge was, instead of having somebody there always to teach, they're there for a month, and then they're gone for 18. And then there's somebody's else there for a month and then gone for 18, and so on. Interestingly, so we had the picture of the original 5 missionaries. 2 of the 5 are in this picture. Bottom right, top left. Retberg and Schlomer. And then the other 2 guys are newer since then. So what the Colombian church did in 2006, they said, we need to reach our own people in our own country. So they called it Evangelismo Nacional, National Evangelism in Colombia. So we're going to try to reach people in our own country in our own way. And so one of the first places that they reach is in a city called Quibdó. You can see it on the map. It's really small print, but Medellin is up and to the right from it. Quibdó is where the arrow thing is. And so here's a picture of that group. And I'm just going to run through some of these. That was 2009. In 2010, they actually called Pastor Henry Herrera, who we spent most of our time with, as a national missionary. And so his job through the church is to go and contact all these new congregations that are starting and being founded throughout Colombia. And so with, let me see here. This is another picture of Pastor Henry and his wife, again with the giant in the middle. El Gigante, that's me in Spanish. So Henry's on the left, his wife Eliana's on the right, and me in the middle. Gives you an idea of who they are. Henry is 43 years old. He said he's been a Lutheran for 25 years. And so he was taught by those missionaries, and just is a very neat guy to talk to, because he's always thinking about more things that we can do, more people that we can reach, more people who need to hear the gospel. And so then 2012, another congregation in Santa Marta. My picture of the map went away. I did have a map of Santa Marta, but I don't remember where it is. Another one in 2013 in Manizales. Notice, so Manizales is a city, it's about 120 kilometers south of Medellin. You want to know how long it takes to get there on a good day? On a good day, it's 3 hours to get there. 120 kilometers is what, about, I think, 50 miles? Something like that. All right, we'll say 80 miles. Something like that. I'm not good at converting that stuff. And so 80 miles, how long did it take to, so 80 miles, or so in America we think 80 miles, all right, hour and a half on a bad day. Well, 3 hours on a good day. Roads under construction, but the idea of a 4-lane highway, there are 4-lane highways, they're just pretty rare. Most of the road there is 2-lane, winding up and down mountains and things like that. With construction on the way, interesting thing, there's a word in Spanish, or at least in Colombia. So when we call them the flaggers, here in America where they have the stop sign and the slow sign, in there they call them la parecigas. You got a lot of parecigas on the way there. So the stop sign, the word for stop in Colombia is pare. So there's the red sign that says pare on it. The back side of the sign is green, it says siga, go. And so they call it the parecigas. They turn the sign to make you stop, make you wait, make you go. So anyways, Manizales is that far away. It took us about 6-7 hours to get there because of the parecigas and everything. So it was a long ride. I will talk about how they came into contact with these groups more in just a minute. But so Manizales, you can see it on the map. Medellin is up. Manizales is there. Actually, this is Armenia. So if you see the arrow for Armenia, Manizales is just right above it. Another group in Armenia, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, Armenia. And one thing to notice, so you look at the group in Manizales, this group in Armenia, where are they meeting? Yeah, looking at somebody's home. And so that was, it's not really a new innovation because where did the earliest Christians meet? People's homes. And so that's what they're doing in these places. Another congregation in Ibagué, let me get the map of it here. So Ibagué is there. Still, you can see Medellin, not very far away. Ibagué is a 10-hour drive, 10-hour bus ride if you go there. And it's probably, I don't know, maybe 200 kilometers away. And all because of the winding roads and going through the mountains and so on. Ibagué is, so the group here, one of the people in that church actually owns a hotel. And so they get to meet in the hotel meeting area. And actually, if I go back, let me go back to Manizales real quick. Manizales now, when we went there, we didn't go to a home. One of the leaders in their church owns, I guess you call it an aquatic center. Pools, slides, all hot tubs, things like that. Well, it also has an event center attached to it. So there's a disco ball hanging on the ceiling and little restaurant to sell hot dogs and stuff. So that's where they have their church gatherings now in that aquatic center that they own. So it's called Using What You Have. All in all in Colombia, our church has right around 240 members in the whole place. It's on one hand, it's 240, you look at that and it's like, it's a lot and it's not, right? It's a lot of people and yet, so how many people are in Medellin? 2.5 million. And so there's still always more and more people to be reached. And so here's the 4 national pastors. You see their names better than their pictures. Pastor Raul, Pastor Adolfo, Pastor Tony, and Pastor Elkin. Pastor Tony actually was the one who did the sermon that day when we went to church. And he's very dynamic and energetic and so on. It was really enjoyable to listen to. Even if I maybe only understood 90% of it instead of 100% of it. What I learned with the churches is, let me find my page with my notes. You saw the groups meeting in homes, and sometimes with our churches we can get distracted by all the stuff that goes with budgets, buildings, and with all those things, it can be easy to forget what church is all about. What's church all about? It's people gathering around God's Word to be fed and filled with that Word so that we can believe in Him, serve Him, and live for Him. And sometimes for people who were raised in churches with pews and buildings and books and everything like that, sometimes a transition like that can be a challenge. Sometimes people think it's not a real church unless you have a building and hymnals and pews. The Pastor Henry actually said that sometimes they struggle with that people say, well, you're not a real church because you don't have a building and pews and whatever. You use plastic lawn chairs. Church is not about those things. Church is about gathering around the Word. Another challenge sometimes is training leaders. Right, actually not a challenge, it's what I've learned. It's important to train leaders. So this church, they're almost always involving, so in the front of church, we're used to me doing it all, right? If I'm not up there, it's because I'm having a coughing fit right before Christmas. But you're used to me being up in front doing it all. Well, they had another man who was training to be a pastor. He did the first part of the service. introduced everything, and then did the readings, and then Pastor Tony did the rest of the service. And so I think, is there ways that we could get more people involved in just being comfortable with that? Can you be in front of church? Can you read a Bible reading? Would that make you comfortable to think about being a church leader someday as well? Another thing to learn is we're so different and yet the same. You know, that church, it was Latin music and in a different language, and all the ways that it was different, and yet outside of those surface differences, it was the same. Heard a message that I could have well preached myself. That's why it was so good, actually. I heard a message that I could have preached myself that day. The people just welcomed us. These people are here from America. They're just warm and friendly and all of that. And we're different, but yet we're the same. And then the last thing that I learned is, just as Christians, it's easy to take so much for granted. The Sunday in church, I put an offering in the plate. It was 50,000 pesos, $17. $17 is what I'll spend on a couple beers at Mother Road. And yet probably, I'm going to guess, that was one of the biggest individual offerings put in the plate that day. And for me, it was just kind of like, just made me think more about it. It's easy for me to want to go, and do, whether it's a couple beers at Mother Road or whatever, just something that I enjoy versus how big of a difference something like that makes for them. It just kind of made me stop and think more about how blessed we are as Americans, physically, spiritually, and I should really think more about using the things that I've been given to accomplish the greater good. And it's nothing wrong with enjoying myself a little bit, but just to rethink some of that. So anyways, that's what I learned. For the sake of being done, should I keep going? Or are there questions? I'm glad you brought that up. Sunday morning, so 10 a.m., Sunday morning, 9 o'clock they had a Bible study beforehand, and so people kind of started trickling in, 8:45-ish, do the Bible study, and then the service started at 10, because actually it's another innovation that I would love to bring here. Because everyone loves to talk and they're so friendly, they installed a clanging bell in the back of the church, and so when it's time for something to start, they just ring the bell really loudly, and then that's the cue: be quiet and go sit down because we're going to start. And so they did it at the start of the Bible study, and they also did it at the start of the service. I didn't pay attention to how long it went. I would guess it went about an hour. They had, during the Bible study, they had 4 groups meeting. They had the big adult group met in the church. There was, should I go back? So one of the groups is Sunday school with kids. Younger kids. Another group was like youth confirmation, so older kids. And then I think the fourth group didn't meet that day, so there were only 3, so I don't remember what the other one was. But it might have been like an adult confirmation type group that was meeting. So 4 different Bible studies that day. The way, so they were, you could tell, a lot less formal. Pastor didn't wear the white or anything like that. He just wore, I think he had a coat and maybe a tie. I don't know if he had a tie, but definitely had a coat. Just a lot less formal than maybe what we're used to. But everything was still there that we're used to having in our worship service. Last one, I think this is the shortest section. Opportunities now and in the future. So we talked about, well, how are they getting these contacts in Manizales, in Armenia, and in Ibagué? How are they getting all these contacts and people through a website that our missionaries launched a few years ago now called Academia Cristo? On the website, it's basically 3 types of resources. Resources to learn the Bible, resources to be able to teach the Bible to others, resources to plant a church. And basically what our missionaries all over Latin America have found is that there are people all over, and there's people in America this way too, who just want to know the Bible, want to learn the Bible, have spiritual questions, and don't know where to go. And so Academia Cristo was launched. They do a lot of sharing on Facebook and social media outlets, things like that. And they have, through Academia Cristo, connections all over the world. Every country in Central and South America, there's at least one person who we've had contact with through Academia Christo. Oftentimes in places where we haven't ever dreamed of sending a missionary, have contacts there through the website. People have participated in Bible studies and learned, all right, so how can I take what I've learned and teach other people? How can I teach my family or people in my community? And so that's how the group in Ibagué and the group in Manizales and all, they were all started. First contact came through Academia Christo. And it's been so blessed that what they've said is now they're going to take everything that's Academia Christo and they're going to put it in English. So that people who are English speaking can have all the same resources, whether that's in, because how much of the world speaks English? A lot of it. Actually between English and Spanish, between those two languages, I think you can cover 2/3 of the world's population, maybe 3/4, something like that, some insane amount of people between English and Spanish. And so that's Academia Christo. Just if you want, it's all in Spanish, obviously, but if you want to check it out, you can see some of the resources that are there. So this was, it's a YouTube video about the congregation in Ibagué. I was going to show it. It's all in Spanish, but it's the subtitling is a little bit wonky, so I won't show it to you. We'll just skip it and go on to the next one. But it basically tells the story. We were looking for teaching the Bible. We were looking for spiritual growth. We found Academia Christo. We loved the classes. We loved the teaching. Pastor Henry came out to see us and continued to teach us. And now we have this little church in Ibagué. That's the video, 3-minute video in 30 seconds. This next video is, and I'm actually not going to show this one either. It's a 10-minute video. But, well, maybe I'll show a few minutes of it. It's about Venezuela. So, the connection with Venezuela and Colombia are kind of, they view each other like brothers. They're different nationalities, but they always have this brotherhood when they look at each other. Well, we can't send people to Venezuela as Americans, but Venezuela will be glad to let a Colombian come in and teach the Bible to them. And so with a contact through Academia Christo, Pastor Henry's been able to go and to meet with this other man who wants to be a missionary, who was looking for teaching the Bible, looking for great resources to do that and training to do that. And now that man can teach and preach in Venezuela where we can't go. Let me just show 2 minutes of it to show you who these people are.
Academia Cristo, aquí tu paz.
Hola, yo soy el pastor Jackson Rodríguez, pastor misionero en Venezuela y actualmente en la isla de Margarita.
All right, did you catch that? Yeah, I know, yeah. Yeah, Pastor Jackson Rodriguez, missionary in the city of Margarita. That's where he lives, city of Margarita in Venezuela. I know, Margarita, huh? Maybe that's the trick to more people coming to Bible studies. So anyway, I'll just stop it here. He's talking about, he'll go on in the video, he'll talk about how he found Academia Christo. They'll see some of the churches that are in Venezuela that have been started in connection with Pastor Rodriguez, who's here. And it's really fascinating, mostly for us, because Venezuela is not a place where we can go. Now the connection with all of you here is the Wings group, our women's group here, took their Christmas offering. And they said, well, Pastor's going to Colombia. We want to send it to that. And so I got in contact with my friend who's in Latin American missions and said, well, my people want to give this gift. What's the best way to do it? And so he said, actually, that's great because Pastor Henry's had this contact with Pastor Rodriguez in Venezuela, and we'd love to be able to send Pastor Henry to Venezuela again to work with them, but we could only fund a little bit of that request. And so now with your gift, we can fund a lot more of that request. And so I don't know any timelines or anything like that, but I would guess that the Wings offering was $225. That'll probably fund another trip to Venezuela for Pastor Henry to go and to do more teaching and to meet with these people and to be able to reach more people with God's Word. And so you think about little gifts for us make a big difference for them. And so for all of you, I think it's kind of a neat thing to be able to say this is where your offering for Christmas went, is to reach people, to help the people in Colombia reach the people in Venezuela that we can't reach here in America. If you want, I can share this video to you. You might need to subtitle it somehow. I don't know how to do that. Another opportunity is through Iglesia Luterana Cristo. It's actually a virtual church. So because we have contacts through Academia Cristo all over Latin America, many of them in places where we don't have a missionary or can't have a missionary, or there's only so many missionaries that you can send. Well, how can we serve these people with God's word? Well, they said, let's start a virtual church. And so they call it Iglesia Luterana Cristo. And they do, it's a streamed live service every Sunday morning. Starts at like 7 a.m.-ish, because they're Latin American, so time is not precise. Starts about 7 a.m. They have in that church on a given Sunday morning 25 people from all over the world logging in to watch it and so on. Typically they're people who don't have a church anywhere, I should say a Lutheran church anywhere near them that they could go to. And so kind of a neat opportunity and resource there. The future. My comments on the future all come from Pastor Henry Herrera. We spent a lot of time with him, and he is just, I guess, a leader and a visionary. And so, looking to the future, he has all kinds of great ideas for what can be done to reach more people. One of the challenges that are always faced with churches in Latin America is just American dependency on Americans. So it's a little bit of a cultural thing. I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but it's not uncommon that Latin Americans have an inferiority complex when it comes to Americans. That the Americans are the ones who really know how to do stuff. And so if you want to get stuff done, you got to do it the American way. And so, well, if the Americans go, then we can't do it on our own. And so it's a little bit of that, like I said, I don't know how quite to describe it, but it's there. And that's part of the reason why oftentimes when the missionaries have to leave someplace, the ministry deflates a little bit, because there's this struggle with whether it's dependency or we can't do it on our own without the Americans and so on. And so how can, the way Pastor Henry thinks is he acknowledges all the challenges that come with it. It's easy for them to, because I could write a $100 check for their ministry today and it wouldn't hurt me and my family at all. And it's easy, there's how many other Americans that could do that? And so it's easy for them to let the Americans own their ministry as opposed to owning it themselves. At the same time, so that's always a challenge, but at the same time, how can we work together is what Pastor Henry always says. How can we work together to reach more people with the Word of God? And so one of the challenges that they have is that, so we have churches in Puerto Rico, we have churches in the Dominican Republic, churches in Mexico, churches in Colombia, churches in Peru, churches in Chile, all over Latin America, but in Puerto Rico we have like 4 churches. Colombia we have 5 or 6 churches. All over Latin America, these countries, it's 3 churches, it's 5 churches, it's 4 churches, it's 2 churches. So how can we have all these Latin American countries work together? And so what he dreams of is just a Lutheran Latin American church body that they can partner together with, and so that it's not just the little Colombians doing it on their own and the little Puerto Rican group doing it on their own, but that they can all work together. And so he's put together proposals that are going all kinds of places to try and make that happen. Another challenge for them is training pastors. They don't have a standard method for training. Missionaries have done a lot of it when they've been there, but how can they teach up the next generation of people? And so one of the reasons that they want to join together is so that they can maybe have a more organized system for doing that and more of a standard of, all right, so this is the kind of training that a pastor has to have to be called a pastor, and so on, just to be able to do that. He wants Latin America to own their churches and not to be dependent on America. Let me see here. So that's all stuff that's in the future. I guess I don't have anything else to comment on there. Any questions? The top part is part of the air. It just means to read if you wanna. So my friend who's a missionary in Latin America, he writes blog posts about his mission work. And so I've known this guy. We went to high school together, college together. He took a year off to go chase his girlfriend, now his wife, to the Dominican Republic. But we would have been together through 12 years of school. But he's a really good writer. just enjoyable reads. So he writes a couple blog posts about ministry in Latin America. So if you want to grab one to take home and read, it talks a little bit about music, talks a little bit about their time in Ecuador, so it's not Colombia, but both the stories they're just fun to read. So feel free to come grab one of those. So yeah, those are there. And last thing is just any questions? Stuff I didn't talk about, or stuff that I touched on that you want to hear more about?
I was just kind of curious. You're talking about training of pastors in Latin America. I mean, it's a big thing here in the U.S. now that they have online schools. Is that something that they're considering to do? Like you already said, most of them have tablets and all that
Yeah.
stuff.
It is something that they're already doing. And this sometimes the best training happens face to face, and so it's balancing the practicality of online versus the value of face to face. But yeah, the Pastor Henry does every week. He does a Bible class via Skype to people all over Latin America. I don't even know where they are, but yeah, through Skype, and that's aimed at teaching leaders in the church. Maria, do you have a question? Did I learn a lot more Spanish? Well, what I like to say is I learned how much I forgot in the last 20 years. But I did learn a lot because I would have had a hard time pronouncing the words that we said in Spanish today if I hadn't gone. So maybe now I can talk to your dad without stumbling over words. Maybe. One of the things, it's all over Latin America, is Roman Catholicism is far more cultural than it is a religion. There is a saying that most Latin Americans go to church 4 times in their lifetime. And they all have to do, I can't say it cleanly, but it was about throwing something on you, throw a little water on you, throw a little rice on you, and then the last one, throw a little dirt on you. There's one more in there too. But most go to church for 4 times in their life, for baptism, wedding, burial, and there's a 4th one that I can't remember. But it was something else that gets thrown on you in that instance. Could have been that, but I can't think of something being thrown on you. But yeah, it's far more cultural than it is religious, which is often why there's spiritual searching. So as an example of the searching, so we were in school, the teacher that we had in the morning, he gets a class of 2 pastors, a seminary professor, and 3 seminary students in his class. And so he says, great, this is a great time for me to ask all of my faith questions and to get them answered. So he wasn't afraid. Actually, that was one of the things that he had us talk about, was he said, well, you guys are going to be pastors, you need to talk about this. But it's also because he was curious himself and wanted to hear what we would say. And then the teacher that we went touring with in the afternoon, she says, yeah, I was baptized Catholic and I was confirmed, but I don't go because I had these questions, and every time I asked a question, they called me a blasphemer. And so just, there's a lot of searching going on because people do naturally, I think, have spiritual questions, but when the answer to those questions is you can't be asking that question, it doesn't provide a healthy anything, I guess. So yeah, I would say far more cultural than it is religious. So what I told my missionary friend was that having gone, I learned how much I've forgotten. And then, so he invited me to participate, to sit in on one of his classes. So they do it over a website app called Zoom, if you've ever used that for business meetings or whatnot. And so I sat in, and it was kind of cool. They had someone from Argentina, someone from Costa Rica, from all over Latin, a couple from Mexico. But what I realized is that I wasn't used to listening to Spanish and understanding it. And then, so people from Mexico, you compare English, you talk to somebody from the South versus somebody from New York. Well, the same thing happens in Spanish. And so somebody from Mexico talks differently than somebody from Ecuador, than somebody from Argentina. And combine that with sometimes spotty internet connections in Latin America, I was like, I can understand like every 3rd word that those guys said. And even then I wasn't really sure. And then to come up with a well-phrased answer, what happened to me all the time in Colombia was I had this thought that I wanted to share, and I would get like 3 words in, and then it's like, oh, there's a word that I don't know. And so that was, so anyways, I came to the conclusion that probably I wasn't in a place to be ready to do that. But I was also told that the website, Academia Cristo, they always could use more help replying to emails. They have a live, if you go there and on your computer, there's a thing in the corner, a live chat box that pops up. Got any questions? People just demand the live chat box so that whenever somebody comes on with a question, you can get an answer to them right away. And so I said, if I can do that and I can have Google Translate open in the next window in case I miss a word, that I can help with. And I haven't heard back from him yet. That was just last week that I sent him that. 12:11. I think we did pretty good. You guys think of any other stuff you want to know? I do have a lot more pictures that didn't make it into the presentation. And I don't know of a great way to, if you follow me on Facebook, I shared them on my Facebook. But if you want to see more of them or hear more about it, I'm happy to talk anytime because I love Colombia and I love Latin America. And I'm happy to talk about anything. So there's one last, oh, here it is, the last slide, the blessing is what we're going to close with. So this song, it sings it twice. So the first time you can just listen, and then the second time you can sing along. But it's the same blessing that we use to close our service. El Señor te bendiga y el Señor te guarde, el Señor haga resplandecer su rostro sobre ti y tenga de ti misericordia. El Señor vuelva su rostro hacia ti y te conceda la paz. Amen. All right.
El Señor te bendiga, el Señor te guarde, el Señor haga resplandecer su rostro sobre ti y tenga de ti misericordia. El Señor vuelva su rostro hacia ti y te conceda la paz, y te conceda la paz. El Señor te bendiga, el Señor te guarde, el Señor haga resplandecer su rostro sobre ti y tenga de ti misericordia. El Señor vuelva su rostro hacia ti y te conceda la paz, y te conceda la paz. Amén.
And amen. The end.